Chapter 10 talks about organizational structure. It's an excellent chapter and it's an important foundational chapter. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is simply focus you in on the highlights and the things I want you to carry away from the chapter. Organizational structure is a lot more important than it may seem, and yet at the same time, it's not about so much as picking the right structure as it is about understanding the fault lines with that selection and then doing the best you can to ameliorate that. The textbook does a nice job in a little more complicated manner of explaining that organizations tend to change over time. Organizations start off as a simple structure, which is to say no real structure other than everyone reports to the boss. And this is where your work experience is going to affect how you view this material. Some of you continue to work for an organization that's in a simple structure. It's a small business dominated by the owner. Everybody reports to him or her. Everybody knows it. They make all the decisions. Some of you are working in bigger organizations that have the functional format. Some of you are working in larger organizations that have a divisional of some sort of structure, and you're going to bring all that experience to the play as you understand what we're talking about. After you graduate from the simple structure, commonly the most often selected form of structure is the functional, and that's simply to say that everybody begins to work for a head of marketing, a head of production, a head of personnel. And so around those few individuals, organizations form underneath them. And then over time, perhaps those organizations can grow quite large. What are some of the advantages of a functional form? It's easy to implement. It's logical, it's comfortable, and what I mean by that is, by personality type, marketing people like to be around other marketing people. Engineers like to be around engineers, and so people are comfortable. It also establishes a very clear progression for the workforce, so employees like it because they can see how they can move up in the organization because it's very clear. It also tends to breed expertise. An example that focuses an organization that focuses on production, for example, is going to get very good at understanding everything about production and how that works. So there is a lot of expertise within this organization. And to the extent that it is a simple product line, and in a smaller company especially, it works really, really well. What is the downside of the functional structure? It's very simple. Within these different functions, which the textbook correctly points out to you are often called silos, there tends not to be a lot of communication. And so all the decisions that have to be made go all the way up the marketing chain, across, and then down. There's not a lot of interconnectivity within the silos. That can breed an us versus them mentality. It can also breed an attitude of we're going to do what's good for marketing, even if it's not good for the company. Not that anybody would say that. It's just that they're making a decision that works very well for marketing, but it doesn't work for anybody else, or it works very well for the engineers in the R&D section, but not for anybody else. And it really forces all of the decision making up to the CEO level. There is no one responsible for profit and loss below the level of the CEO because nobody has all the tools they need to make a company. Well, that doesn't work so well. What's the obvious fix to that? Well, let's go to divisions. And one of the things you have to understand about a divisional structure is divided how. It can be divided, like in this chart, by products. It can be divided by geographic regions. It can be divided by related products. So there's lots of different ways to establish how it is divided. Some of the decisions that you have to make is how much is in the division and how much is at headquarters. For example, you can see in this particular slide, this shows that a lot of things are at the upper level, corporate R&D lab, corporate personnel, and then the divisions control relatively less. What are some of the strengths of this? It tends to breed more focus on the whole task. It also allows you to delegate some profit and loss responsibility. For example, you can delegate to each of those product divisions responsibility for profit and loss. Because it puts more dissimilar people together, you get more of a sense of team and that sense of unity around the product, more shared information. What are the cons of that? Well, clearly, what you get in there is you can create some silos that now inhibit sharing of information. Whereas the product market that's focused, let's assume that there are similar products, the product market that's focused in this one area makes a discovery that has applicability to another product, but they don't share it because they may not have any incentive to, or they may not have an easy way to share it. Incidentally, that's what some of those boxes in the corporate structure are designed to fix, because they become the implements of sharing. The other con is it gets expensive. It's not going to be as efficient in some ways. You're going to have more marketing people in this organization than you would perhaps if you had a centralized marketing department. So because of, well, I'm ahead of myself. The next graduation up is you'll hear about strategic business units, and these are even more standalone. Notice the corporate headquarters tends to get a little bit smaller, and the divisions tend to own more. There are lots of multinational companies are organized like this: GE, HP, those sorts of companies. You see these very distinct SBUs. And then the textbook talks lastly about holding companies. And holding companies are divisions to the extreme. This would be one like Danaher Manufacturing, which has like 50-ish companies in its portfolio, and you have a very lean corporate headquarters with as little as 100 or 200 people, because they're basically controlling standalone companies, and they're simply allocating capital. Another very famous company that uses more of the holding company structure is Berkshire Hathaway, because they have very diverse companies, and all they do is they hold the management responsible for the results. In the next video, I'm going to take up with, given that we now understand what are some of the problems with this, how some people try to fix those problems.